Oh, there's another one. Another plane just hit. Right. Oh my God. Another plane has just hit. It hit another building. Flew right into the middle of it. Explosion.
Two commercial airliners were hijacked and deliberately crashed into the World Trade Center in New York. Another targeted the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and a fourth plane crashed in Pennsylvania. Two Bermudians were killed at the World Trade Center. Rondell Tankard, age 31, was starting her first week there, having been seconded from reinsurance firm Aon Bermuda. A former Warwick Academy student, she had also directed the AME Mass Choir. Boyd Gatton, a 38-year-old former Saltus pupil and an operations manager at Fiduciary Trust, was also killed. His interests included photography, carpentry, and Tai Chi. American national Robert Higley, age 29, who attended Saltus for 3 years, also died. He was working for Aon Risk Management Services. As events were unfolding in the U.S., quick action was taken here in Bermuda. Armed Bermuda Regiment soldiers were sent to protect our airport, cruise ship terminals, the U.S. consulate in Devonshire, and the oil docks in St. George's. Former Police Commissioner Jonathan Smith led operations on the ground. U.S. airspace was closed and 9 international flights were diverted to Bermuda amid fears that terrorists could be on board. Tonight, Jonathan Smith takes us back to one of the most momentous days in modern history. And tomorrow evening, we will speak to Lieutenant Colonel Gibbons, who commanded the Bermuda Regiment at the time.
Early that morning, whatever time it was, 9:30 or so, the U.S. consulate called, and her words resonate to this day. Jonathan, have you seen what they've done? And she quickly just told me, what had happened at the World Trade Center. I was able to turn on the cable TV, and of course, the images that were seen were the images that we all saw those 20 years ago. This was the first time a security event overseas had caused such a reaction that the Bermuda security services had to respond to. And I think we'd be hard-pressed to know of any other event in the last 50 years or so where that has happened. So the sheer scale of it was huge, and it was significant. The single biggest immediate impact was 9 international airlines, which had landed in Bermuda. So translators were needed, accommodation was needed. And when I recall back on the events of the day, it was the sheer uncertainty, not knowing what was going to come next. There was even a fear that were there other terrorists on any of these transatlantic flights? So this was real unknown territory that we were having to manage. And, through the resources of the Bermuda Police, our intelligence services, both here in Bermuda and overseas, as well as the Bermuda Regiment in particular, we just identified a number of priorities. Security of the airport was number one. Security of those passengers and establishing who they were was another priority. And then we had thousands of Americans here on cruise ships and vacationing because it was September, and they were enormously concerned and anxious, as you can well imagine. So we actually had to deploy police to the cruise ship terminal as well.
Generally, again, the response was very favorable, and I'm sure that's the way you felt.
There's actually an interesting parallel, I think. If you recall where we were in Bermuda in March of April 2020, so 20 months ago. It's one of those rare times where we actually get cut off from the world. The ports got closed, the airports got closed, we were on our own, just like many other countries were. But we were, our airfield was effectively closed for that several day period. So there's a parallel to draw in terms of, for that brief period, we relied on what we had on island. Nobody was going to help us. Obviously, the Americans were totally stretched with what they had to deal with, and we had to deal with what we had to here. And one of our strategic priorities, I do remember very well, was geared towards the Americans that were on island. And we in Bermuda didn't perceive that we were a potential target, as it were. But the Americans who were in Bermuda at the time did perceive themselves as a target. For us, a cruise ship could have been a target. Any of the American-based airlines that landed in Bermuda could have been a target. So those were they became priorities for us in reassuring the Americans that were on island, thousands of them, both resident, tourists, and on cruise ships, to reassure them for them, what was an extremely difficult time, and one that lives on in their memories as well.